Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to talk about the Spawn remake. Now, just to give a little bit of a recap, the Spawn remake has been kind of off and on in development hell for about a decade now. And really, it didn't start gaining steam until probably about 2017, when Jamie Foxx was attached to the project to play Spawn. Now, to give some specifics on the project before I kind of get to the news that we're seeing today, basically, Todd McFarlane had clarified that he wanted two things with the Spawn remake. Number one, he wanted to direct it, and also write it. And number two, he wanted to make sure that it was rated R, because he thought that having a Spawn movie that was PG-13 was a disservice to the character. I would agree with that. Now, most people would consider that insane. For somebody who has never directed a film to direct some kind of a superhero film. Apparently, this is being shopped around at Blumhouse, of all places, which, again, I kind of understand the horror vibe a little bit, but it's kind of, I don't know. I don't know if you're going to get the budget you want. And he does talk about, he needs a budget. He needs a budget in order to do it correctly, which, again, I would agree with. Now, as far as the film goes, it was rumored a couple days ago that the film was going right back into development hell because Jamie Foxx supposedly dropped out of playing Spawn in the film. Now, this has been clarified by Todd McFarlane since. Now, Todd McFarlane made a tweet that basically said the Academy Award-winning guy that was attached is now no longer attached. Now, Jamie Foxx is an Academy Award winner, so most people assumed that that was actually him that had left the project, and a lot of people had basically thought, like, oh, great, it's going back into development hell again. In reality, apparently this was a co-writer who was working with McFarlane to write the film. So Fox is still attached to play Spawn as soon as the film winds up actually getting off the ground. Now, it is as close as it's been since its inception, because you do have a director in McFarlane. Again, Blumhouse has apparently agreed to that. You have a production company in Blumhouse to actually do the film. You have a star signed on, a very high profile star like Jamie Foxx, who signed on to the role. So there's a lot of stuff that's in place. There's also rumors going around. I think that Jeremy Renner is going to be playing the Twitch character, but again, that's a rumor. I don't know the substantiation of that. But to look at kind of how this thing is shaping up, it's very shaky right now. This isn't something that necessarily I feel like inspires much confidence in the project, and I know a lot of people are going to be skeptical of it in general anyway because of how long this thing has spent in development hell, and because of the lackluster performance of the first film. But when you look at the actual movie itself, McFarlane has kind of come out and said some concerning things. He's kind of come out and said, I don't really care so much about the story as long as Spawn acts and looks badass. It's like, okay, that's maybe not the best thing to be saying to people when a lot of people really want a good story, but at the same time, he's also the person that originated the character. So if anybody's going to write the character correctly, I would assume it would be the person who created him. So yeah, it's kind of a give and take there. Like it reminds me of an interview I saw on Collider, because this was actually the one time I watched Collider because Todd McFarlane was on there, and he was having an interview and they were talking about Venom 2 because Todd McFarlane was the original illustrator for Venom when Venom was in the comic books. When he first came about in the comic books in the late '80s, and they were basically asking him, what was his opinion on the original Venom that was seen in Spider-Man 3 versus the 2018 Venom in his own movie. And basically his whole thing was like he didn't give a shit about the story. He just wanted the character to look correctly. And he didn't think the Topher Grace version looked correctly. He didn't think he was big enough. He thought he was supposed to be, this huge hulking thing, which is basically what he was in the 2018 version, which is why Todd McFarlane liked that film. Now that inspires That inspires some concern, because if all you give a shit about is if the movie looks good, you're making a Transformers film, and that's not generally something that most people want to aim for unless you're Michael Bay. So I'm a bit concerned with that. At the same time, McFarlane has been very upfront about the production process on this film, and whether or not stuff, whether or not people are dropping out, who's signing on, what he wants to do with it. And again, I don't disagree with some of his points. I think the film should be rated R, and I think there is a market for rated R films, especially now after Deadpool and Logan and Joker and those films have come out. There is definitely a market for rated R superhero films. And I think that that should be carried forward now, moving forward, especially with Spawn, who is a character that really benefits from the R rating because a lot of the stuff in the comic books is very gory and very messed up and very profanity laden. So there's a lot going on there in terms of how much stuff McFarlane wants to do with this movie because basically he wants to bring the comic to life. And I don't think that's a bad idea. Zack Snyder did that with Watchmen. I think it worked out very well. Others directors have done it with other, more adult-oriented comic books. And again, I don't think it's turned out badly for the most part. But the thing is if you get too gratuitous, because here's the other thing. Spawn is a product of the 90s. The 90s was the era of extreme. And that is X dash TREME, not extreme like it's spelled, appropriately, extreme, because that was the era when there was a lot of stuff that we thought was cool, but it was really fucking cringy, or at least it's very cringy now that we're all older, for the most part. There's some nostalgia laden to it, but the thing is, I feel like if you get a little too back to that point, I think you should update the character a little bit in terms of maybe the demeanor. Well, not the demeanor, because Spawn kind of has a really good demeanor already for his character. But I think that unless you place it in the 90s, again, like the original film, which was made in 97, you could just basically do a carbon copy of the comic books and it didn't matter. Yeah, I think that again, I don't think he should be changed in the sense of his character and how he functions, but update him a little bit. Don't make him say dumb shit that you think is cool, because probably 90% of the time it's not going to be, unless you have a really good writer behind it. And again, if it's just Todd McFarlane doing the writing process, because now this other writer has apparently dropped out who had won an Academy Award. Again, we don't know what this guy's name is. We don't even know who was attached to this, because as far as writers go, we only knew about McFarlane. So that sounds kind of weird in general. Now, this could be McFarlane kind of covering for himself if Fox did drop out. Maybe give him time to get him back in the fold and try and talk things out. But like I said before, Todd McFarlane has been very upfront about the creative process for this film. So I don't think he would necessarily lie about that unless he knew that it was going to affect the movie deal somehow. In terms of keeping it on the books at Blumhouse, because Blumhouse, if Jamie Foxx were to drop out, I could see Blumhouse dropping the film. So maybe it had something to do with that, but I feel like Blumhouse would know if Jamie Foxx dropped out of the film. Todd McFarlane wouldn't be able to weave some tale about that in social media and kind of glaze over it. I don't think that would happen. I think behind the scenes they would have known and they would have canceled the project if they saw fit to do so. But that's just kind of my opinion on it. I don't know necessarily if we're ever going to see this movie, but we're the closest we've been in a very long time. Now, I was not the Spawn comics when they were coming out originally in the early to mid. Well, they're still going, but when they were originally being published, the first series of comics was being published. I was far too young to be reading them. I did not read them when I was younger. I read them when I was a lot older. I do enjoy them. I think they're overall it's a really good story. The character of Al Simmons I enjoy because he's kind of this. He's as jaded as you can come without being pure evil, which is kind of funny. In terms of the way that he conducts himself. They always have this, oh, superheroes don't kill. Like, no, Al Simmons kills everybody. He just murders the shit out of everybody. So, it had that attractiveness where it was a lot different than a lot of other comic books that were around, especially at that time. And it kind of paved the way for a lot of anti-hero characters moving forward. Again, kind of like what they did with Venom after a while. even though I think that was after he had left Marvel when they turned Venom into kind of an anti-hero. Because Todd McFarlane really likes dark stuff. He likes really dark, fucked up stories, and that's kind of what I think he's going to bring to the table. Again, the only concern I really have is that what he's been saying about the story is that he kind of wants it to look good as opposed to having a really good story behind it. And I think that is the first thing that you need to kind of nix, because when you move forward, you're moving forward at Blumhouse, and I know he's talked about budget, but you're moving forward at Blumhouse. Blumhouse is not going to give you an outstanding budget. They're not going to give you $150 million to do this movie. They're going to give you probably like 25 to $30 million to do this movie. Maybe a little bit more than that, depending on if you what you can talk out of them. Because Blumhouse generally does not. They spend money on writers, well, some writers, and actors, really. The majority of the rest of the stuff is just kind of copy paste. They use what they can. They cut corners when they can. Again, a lot like a Canon Films, really. They're kind of turning into that now with the amount of movies they're churning out every year. But I don't think they're going to give him the budget that he really wants for this. And I think in order to do a good Spawn story, I think you might need something like a Shazam budget. I think you might need like a $90 to $100 million budget, to do this movie the justice that it should have. But again, I don't know if he's going to get that from Blumhouse, unless maybe you have a financier that comes in from the larger a larger studio. I know that Blumhouse has a buddy relationship with Universal, especially after the success of Invisible Man. So maybe they could convince a producer to come down from there and put some money forward to do this thing. But aside from those points, there's really not too much to talk about with this, because the movie is basically, it's still on. McFarlane is still on to direct and write. Blumhouse is still on to produce, or as the production house to produce the film, and fund it. And Jamie Foxx is still up as as Al Simmons / Spawn. So not a lot has changed, but it's going to be interesting moving forward, because again, Todd does like to give updates pretty regularly on this stuff. So if you're interested in the movie, I would recommend staying glued to his Twitter account. But I want to know what you think. Do you think we're ever going to see a Spawn remake? Do you think that this movie is ever going to happen the way that Todd McFarlane wants it to happen? Or do you think he's kind of, is it kind of a wild goose chase? Do you think he's really kind of, he's chasing after the purple dragon, he's never going to catch it? Again, I'd like to know what your thoughts are. Put them in the comments below. Hit the bell for notifications, hit the like button, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?